Walker, we're interrupting programming to tell you that Bernard Cardinal Law is about to speak out on the subject of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Now, this comes just days before defrocked priest John Geoghan goes on trial in Cambridge for sexual assault. Geoghan also faces dozens of lawsuits filed by people who claim they were sexually molested by Geoghan over several decades. Cardinal Law and the Boston Archdiocese are defendants in 25 of those lawsuits, accused of negligence for not properly supervising Geoghan. Law is responding today in the wake of a Boston Globe Spotlight investigation. Now, that Globe investigation into court documents revealed that the church knew a great deal about Geoghan and his offenses at the time they were committed, but continued to assign him to parishes throughout eastern Massachusetts. Geoghan was finally defrocked in 1998. Also, it is important to note that the Vatican has just come up with new guidelines for how the Catholic Church should handle pedophilia cases. The guidelines were quietly published this week. I'm Liz Walker. Stay tuned. Let's go live. Cardinal Law.
I wish to address the issue of sexual abuse of minors by clergy. And when I have finished this statement, I'll be happy to take questions that you might have on this statement as I have presented it. At the outset, I apologize once again to all those who have been sexually abused as minors by priests. Today, that apology is made in a special way with heartfelt sorrow to those abused by John Geoghan. There is no way for me to adequately describe the evil of such acts. All sexual abuse is morally abhorrent. Sexual abuse of minors is particularly abhorrent. Such abuse by clergy adds to the heinous nature of the acts. It affects a victim's relationship with the church. A child's ability to trust is shattered by such abuse, and self-esteem is often damaged. Today, the issue of sexual abuse is a matter of open and public discussion. While this is often painful, it has allowed us to address the issue more directly. Only in this way can all of us be more alert to its dangers, protect potential victims, respond more effectively to those who have been the victims of abuse, and learn how to deal more effectively with those responsible for such abuse. Here in this archdiocese, I promulgated a policy to deal with the sexual abuse of minors by clergy. This went into effect on January 15th, 1993. All priest personnel records were reviewed in light of this policy. In those instances in which a charge of abuse had not been processed earlier with the rigor of our present policy, the case was reopened and the policy was applied. I am aided in such cases by a priest delegate and by an interdisciplinary review board that examines each case and makes a recommendation to me. This review board includes the mother of a victim, another parent, a clinical social worker, a clinical psychologist, a psychotherapist, a retired justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, a priest, a civil attorney, and usually the group includes a canon lawyer. While the response of the Church understandably focuses on the removal of the threat of future acts of abuse, it is also concerned with providing psychological and spiritual counsel to victims, as well as assistance to parishes coping with such incidents. Victims who come forward are offered confidential psychological counseling and spiritual support. It is my desire that the Church be present in whatever way possible to all those who have suffered such abuse. While our policy has been effective, we continue to refine our procedures. Since our knowledge and experience in dealing with such cases have evolved both within the Church and within society as a whole, I want to be certain that our policy is as effective as it might be. In August last, I directed that our policy be reviewed. This was done previously in 1995. In September, a panel of persons with special expertise began this review process. Except for one priest, this panel consists of laymen and women. The makeup of that panel parallels the makeup of our review team in terms of expertise and background. The work of this group has nearly been completed. I anticipate that the revised policy will be promulgated and made public within 3 to 4 weeks. I wish that we had had such a policy 50 years ago, or when I first came here as Archbishop. Cases were handled then in a manner that would not be acceptable according to our present policy. I know of nothing that has caused me greater pain than the recognition of that fact. I am announcing today a new archdiocesan policy that will mandate all clergy, employees, and volunteers to report any allegations of abuse against a minor following the procedures set forth in the statutes of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In particular, this mandated reporting would include any knowledge of abuse learned by a priest outside of the sacrament of penance or through spiritual counseling. In addition, a number of archdiocesan agencies are in the process of developing and implementing a comprehensive child protection program, Keeping Children Safe. These additions to our present policy will underscore our archdiocesan commitment to a zero-tolerance policy of abuse of minors by clergy. The many acts that have been alleged against John Geoghan constitute a heart-rending pattern. These acts have been reported in some detail in recent media stories. The horror of these acts speak for themselves. The horror of these acts speaks for itself. However much I regret having assigned him, it is nonetheless important to record and to recall that John Geoghan was never assigned by me to a parish without psychiatric or medical assessments indicating that such assignments were appropriate. It is also important to state that it was I who removed him from parish ministry, that I then placed him on retirement, and that I finally asked the Holy See to dismiss him from priesthood without possibility of appeal, even though he had not requested laicization. This extraordinary act of the Holy See went beyond the usual procedures for the laicization of priests. That some should criticize my earlier decisions, I can easily understand. Before God, however, it was not then, nor is it my intent now, to protect a priest accused of misconduct against minors at the expense of those whom he was ordained to serve. Judgments were made regarding the assignment of John Geoghan, which, in retrospect, were tragically incorrect. These judgments were, however, made in good faith and in reliance upon psychiatric assessments and medical opinions that such assignments were safe and reasonable. With all my heart, I wish to apologize once again for the harm done to victims of sexual abuse by priests. I do so in my own name, but also in the name of my brother priests. These days are particularly painful for the victims of John Geoghan. My apology to them and to their families, and particularly to those who were abused in assignments which I made, comes from a grieving heart. I am indeed profoundly sorry. The trust that was broken in the lives of those suffering the effects of abuse is a trust which was built upon the selfless lives of thousands of priests who have served faithfully and well in this archdiocese throughout its history. One of the sad consequences of abuse, a consequence which pales in insignificance in comparison to the harm done to those most innocent of victims, is that they have placed under a cloud of suspicion the faithful priests who serve the mission of the Church with integrity. I can only hope that victims and their families can take some heart from the fact that not only the Church, but society as a whole are both responding more effectively to this overwhelming tragedy. For the Archdiocese of Boston, I pledge a policy of zero tolerance for such behavior. Any priest known to have sexually abused a minor simply will not function as a priest in any way in this archdiocese. Please pray for all those who have been victimized as minors by clergy, as well as for their families. Pray that those responsible may come to conversion of heart and self-awareness. Pray for the hundreds of faithful priests of this archdiocese who bear with me the burden of a few. Before God, we are trying to do the best we can. And in your kindness, pray also for me. And I would take your questions. Yes.
This new policy, will you be reporting to the authorities, the police, and state authorities if there is an accusation of abuse?
That's.
I'm sorry, Monica Brady, WVUR Radio Station.
That's correct. The mandated reporting that is being put in place is that mandated reporting in accord with the statutes of the Commonwealth, and it touches not only priests, as I mentioned, but it touches all church personnel. Yes.
Cardinal Law, Walter Robinson from the Globe.
Yes.
In the spirit of your remarks today, will you also say that the Church will no longer take steps legally to try to keep secret documents which shed light on what the Church knew in these cases, in both the Geoghan case and other pending cases?
Yes, I believe that documents are now available, are they not?
in the Geoghan case, yes, but there are other cases that are pending, and I'm wondering whether the Archdiocese will still continue to seek secrecy orders, or would you drop your opposition?
You know, I have to tell you, Mr. Robinson, that my focus has been on preparing this statement and this case, and I need to just leave it at that. I need to discuss the implications of that question further. Yes.
Emily Rooney, Channel 2. Cardinal, it's fairly widely acknowledged in the psychiatric community that pedophilia is incurable. And I'm curious what kind of guidance you had regarding Father Geoghan, ex-Father Geoghan, in terms of his psychiatric care, and whether now you feel that that was trustworthy advice. You get that advice and then you transfer it into places. We're not a parish. It was still a place where he came.
Sure. Well, you know, Ms. Rooney, the difficulty is to try to put oneself back, in my case, to put myself back in 1984 when I got here, 1985, and to do so with the knowledge that I have in 2002. I had been concerned about this issue, and that is why I insisted on psychiatric evaluation. But I had confidence and would have no reason not to have had confidence in those whose judgment I sought, psychiatrically and medically. I'm no psychiatrist, but given the experience that I have had in these ensuing years and with whatever reading I have done, I have come to the conclusion that no matter what anybody says, that someone who is guilty of this kind of abuse simply cannot be placed in that position of trust, which is the position of a priest. And whatever counsel might be given, that is the policy. I wish that that had been the policy then, and it wasn't. It's not true to say that nothing was done. Something was done, and it would have been done differently had we been doing it the way we do now. Yes?
Kevin Watson from the Patriot Ledger. When you created a new policy in 1993 and ordered a review of personnel records, priest records, what was the result of that review?
Well, I can't give it to you in numbers, not because I'm trying to hide the numbers, but I don't have them in my head. But I can tell you that as we reviewed those cases, and they were all of the personnel files that we had of any priest living, we did find that there were instances where the way the case had been handled had not been handled in the rigor of the policy, and those cases were reopened. And there were instances where people were, because of what was discovered, simply were no longer in ministry.
People were no longer
in ministry. Yes. Yes.
I'm Ashford with the Herald Cardinal Law. You said that the policy that you enunciated today was going to be extremely strict. Is there any retroactivity, and are you prepared to say that you may have people right now that you've identified that you want to?
Well, first of all, there is nobody in an assignment in this archdiocese now, no priest in an assignment in this archdiocese now that I'm aware of who is guilty of sexual abuse of a minor. So it's not a matter then of looking at people who we know who have abused minors and applying a new policy which then might say that they can no longer serve. There is no one now serving. If there is, the allegation has not come forward to me.
But would you report people that you had identified prior to today?
You mean in the mandating?
Yes.
I don't know that the mandating of, I think the mandating is of people who come forward to deal, knowledge that comes from this point forward. As I understand it, I think that's the intent of the law. Yes?
Tony Enrique from the Pilot. Your Eminence, the Church, the Catholic Church, is touching every neighborhood in the Greater Boston area through many services, parishes, hospitals. Would you like to say something to all those who are in relation with the Church? Because all these cases, as you said, creates a cloud. Just to help them to cope with this situation.
Well, what I would hope is that that my words would be heard and taken to heart, and that there would be understanding with regard to the wisdom of this policy of mandating reporting, and that there would be an understandable support and involvement in this educational effort which is going to unroll, because I think that's very important. We want to know. And one of the ways we're going to know if there are cases out there that we're not aware of is through this heightened awareness, and this educational program will help us in that. And I would hope for support in that. Yes?
Dr. Regan from the Boston Herald. Obviously not from Hope, but reading the paper this morning about...
No, I'm not. Bad enough being the Archbishop of Boston.
We're reading the paper this morning about the Vatican's new rules and talking about informing officials that they want to be informed about these cases, but declaring them subject to secrecy, which seems to be exactly at odds with the kind of open policy you're talking about. I'm wondering, the secrecy that the Vatican getting out the Pope, but who's being protected by that?
Let me address that first generally, and then give you a reference for more information, which I think he would be able to give you more competently than I. But from what I understand of those policies, I see them as a positive step. And I have been very hopeful that the Holy See would come out with a policy that would be more effective in dealing with these cases. And I feel certain that the development of this policy is in no small measure due to the kind of painful experience that we have had here in the United States in our effort to bring that to the benefit of the Holy See, so that they could see that this is a pastoral problem that we have to act with and act upon in a new and decisive way. So my colleagues, in reviewing those guidelines, see them as a positive step and don't see them as in any way negatively impacting or affecting what we're doing here. I would say that the procedures, a canonical procedure, normally has with it a certain element of confidentiality, and that confidentiality should not be seen as a drawback to the policy. But I'd like to suggest that any of you who would want to discuss that in further detail might find it helpful to give a call to Monsignor Michael Foster, who is our judicial vicar. He's a canonist, and he could discuss with really greater precision than I the canonical implications. But I can tell you globally that I am heartened by the existence of that policy, and I do not see it in any way a threat to the direction in which we're going.
One last thing, with all due respect, in the Geoghan case, even though, as you said, you were not aware of the severity of his illness or whatever you want to call it, but it did seem at the time that the families involved certainly were aware of it, and there were many whistleblower people, for lack of a better word, that were aware of it. So the Catholics now that say, well, tons of people were telling them then, why?
How are we going to,
now that it's going to be any different, that you're not going to allow this to happen, even with people turning priests in as they did throughout the and stuff, the Porter stuff.
I would hope that the record of then to now might give some confidence. not simply the fact of the policy, but the fact that the policy was implemented, the fact that there is a very strong and competent review board, the fact that we have reviewed the policy again, the fact that there is no priest in this archdiocese in an assignment in this archdiocese, not only a parish assignment, but in an assignment in this archdiocese, whom we know to have been guilty of child abuse. There is none. Now, I have said, and I don't know how else to say it, that judgments were made which in retrospect were tragically incorrect. And there's no effort on my part to gloss over that. But I have to say, in the interest of a truth which I think serves us all in these difficult cases, that the judgments were made in good faith, and there was reliance upon assessments which indicated that these assignments were safe and reasonable. If I got such an assessment now, I would not follow it. Yes.
Cardinal Law, do you have an estimate of how many priests you've barred from assignment because of allegations of abuse?
I cannot estimate a number, but I can tell you that it's, I would agree with your newspaper's editorial assessment this morning about a small minority of priests. But I must say, one is sufficiently painful, and one act of such abuse is sufficiently painful. To be sure, when it's compounded, it just becomes more weighty as a tragedy. But the fact is that one act of abuse of a minor by a priest is one too many.
If I can just follow up, are you going to...
Bernard Cardinal Law speaking to reporters about the Boston Archdiocese's past handling and proposed future handling of sexual abuse cases in the Catholic Church. The Cardinal has apologized both personally and as the leader of the local archdiocese for the actions of John Geoghan, who is noting the evil of the acts of sexual abuse. And of course, John Geoghan is going to go on trial in Cambridge for sexual abuse in just a few days.